Good morning, I'm Mihal and welcome to the Keep the Conversations Going Festival. We're broadcasting live from the TheatreMaker studio at Access Ballymun. Over the next 3 days, from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m, we'll be bringing you a part festival ideas, part fundraising campaign. TheatreMaker.ie will present live conversations and presentations by artists, theatre makers, academics, actors, producers, directors, performers, art workers, all with new ideas to share. TheatreMaker.ie is bringing to you this as part of our first ever fundraising campaign to support the work we are doing. As our residency comes to an end at Access, we are entering the adult world and where we need to begin paying rent and our overhead. We're an all-volunteer organisation of theatre makers who have been covering our own overhead out of our own pockets to keep the conversations going. But now we're asking for your help. We hope that during the festival, you will see the value in keeping TheatreMaker.ie and its resources and content around for a long term. Before our first event kicks off, we ask that you share this video with your friends and colleagues. We also encourage your participation by joining us on YouTube and popping in your comments and questions in the comments section, because we want to know what are you thinking about. Our first presenter is actor and creative coach Andrew Macklin to talk about creative career coaching for creatives. A fantastic topic to start our festival with, so let's dive right in.
Excellent. Thank you, Michal. Thank you very much. And hello and welcome to everybody who is watching today. So what I'll be looking at in this, next half an hour and over the course of the hour is going to be career management and development for freelance creatives. As was mentioned, I'm an actor myself and doing that for about 20 years. So I'm familiar with freelance creative life and its many ups and downs. I'm also a qualified and accredited career coach. So I come with a bit of experience and knowledge in that area as well. And I guess what led me into this particular area is I've found in my own development over the course of time that talking about careers as a creative was always quite an ambiguous thing to try and work through by yourself and indeed with other people. So I found that when I was reaching out to, support networks on the personal side, whether they be friends and family, while their advice was always well-intentioned, it might not always have been the most practical. And so I felt that was hard to get the kind of support I needed in that area in relation to my own professional development. And then on the professional side of it, I guess, while there is lots of excellent specific advice and sort of skills that might build capacities for us in that way, there felt to me like there was a grey area between the personal and the professional where I spent most of my time as an actor and as a creative trying to figure out what was next. And while that was always really enjoyable, it did feel like some support in that specific grey area could be quite useful when trying to decide how I want to move forward, what's really important to me, how do I begin to plan my career, if indeed it is possible to in any way plan your career as a creative. So we'll be talking a little bit around the idea of planning. And while I don't subscribe to a lot of very specific and detailed planning for creatives, because it doesn't quite recognize the fact that it is quite flexible what we're doing. It'll change very quickly, especially as freelancers. So we'll be looking at ways in which we can sort of bring together a bit of structure to how we think about our careers, how we think about how we might move them forward incrementally, and what's the ultimate meaning for us. And we're coming back to that idea of meaning as a bit of a core aspect as we look at careers in general. So what I'm going to look at today will just be a series of perspectives, really, that you can employ in relation to your own professional development, or that you can use as a tool to look at your career and how that might match and meet up with your personal as well. So the personal and professional, I think, are very much intrinsically linked for creatives. And so I think when we think about career planning, I think it's natural to bring both of those worlds together in a way that kind of serves both of them. So I think that's some of the difficulties about doing this work by ourselves sometimes. Although as a creative, I've always really enjoyed that struggle of trying to find your way and making things work for yourself. I think ultimately, What we're often asking ourselves is, how do we create more satisfying and sustainable careers? So when I'm working as a coach with individual artists and creatives one-on-one, that is fundamentally what we're coming back to again and again. It's often that sustainability aspect of it. For me, it's really important to bring in the satisfying element. So what makes our careers and our development meaningful to us? So this is very much about taking a sort of an artist-centered perspective on what we're doing. Quite often, I think we can fall into the line of just doing jobs, just doing what is required of ourselves professionally, but not necessarily being aware of or engaging or reflecting as much as we might need to on the idea of, I guess, the why. So some of the ways in which I might work when coaching with people is sort of in a broader spectrum. So instead of looking on the very specifics of what do you want to do and what is the next step to that and what is a very easily achievable thing you can do, it's more fruitful, as well as looking at that what, is to look at the how and the why as well. So the how element is very much about the ways in which we might think about ourselves, the ways in which we might think about our career, how we engage with others, how we sort of view ourselves in relation to our careers. Because if our view of ourselves and our careers are sort of inherently, I guess, unuseful or negative, then no matter what we do in the what area, we'll continually run up against this idea of maybe I fundamentally don't think in ways that might be more useful to me. So the how is really crucial to look at, and we'll be looking at a little bit of that as well. But to begin with, I think the why is really fundamental. When we're off kilter with the why, we begin to notice it, I think, first relatively to how satisfied or not we feel. So one way of beginning to engage with the why for ourselves, I think, as creatives, is to look a little bit and consider more deeply the idea of values. Now, whenever I've heard people talk about values in the past, I've often seen them present a series of lovely sounding words on an A4 piece of paper that any of us would agree would want in our lives. But I think to take a more specific look at values and why they're important, a way into that is to recognize that they're always at play for us. So the values that we have are very much informing our decisions and our choices right now. So if you consider the books you have on your bookshelf, or the films you watch, or the conversations you have with people when you're 2 pints in, they'll all sort of demonstrate to us how important our values are and what's really coming up for us again. Likewise, if we look reflectively at the past, you can see how in those key moments that were really important to you, that were really satisfying and meaningful, that there was values at play as well there. So things that were fundamentally important to us, whether that be performance or creativity or any of those sort of words we might associate with values. And I think what's important about values in relation to career planning is about making them explicit for ourselves. So quite often they're at work on this sort of subconscious underwater way, sort of influencing what decisions we might make. But by making them more explicit for ourselves, by taking the time to really consider what they are and which ones are particularly important to us, which one we choose to prioritize, that is really important when it comes to making decisions about our career as a whole and as the next step. It's also quite useful if you're in an industry where things change very quickly. So if we have to make very quick decisions about what area we want to move into next, or which job to take, or what we want to do, this sense of really knowing what our values are in a short list of 4 or 5 of them can act as a really easy compass for us to reflect upon. I won't dig into too much into the exercises we could do around values. What will be added, I think, to the chat in this will be a little link to a workbook that you can get on my website, which is, it's free and it requires no personal information at all on your behalf to hand over to get, but it looks at all of what I'll be talking about today in more detail. So if you're interested in the idea of values and how you might dig into that for yourself and in your own career, then we'll drop that into, I guess, a chat box at some point, so you can use that as well. But fundamentally, I guess, to look at it in a really binary way, when it comes to values and that why, the further we're moving away from it, the more dissatisfied we're going to be ultimately. And the further we're moving towards them, the further we're moving towards them, obviously the more satisfied we're going to be as well. And that ties into some of the cores and psychological well-being as well. So the more we're leaning towards the things that we find intrinsically valuable, the more engaged we are, the more sustainable those choices will be as well. So actually there's a lot of research behind that, so it's well worth time looking at those values. And another thing to say about those as well is that they are changing over time. in slow ways. So the more aware we can be of ourselves as to what's important to us, but also with an eye to how they might be changing. A lot of the time working one-to-one in coaching, it's about surfacing the idea of, well, what value is becoming more important to you? By having that sort of awareness and asking yourself those questions, being reflective in that way, in a regular way, it means that you can avoid finding yourself in a bit of a creative cul-de-sac further down the road, where perhaps maybe you haven't acknowledged some of the ways in which those values have changed or are changing. And so you might find yourself in a position where things just feel off. You're not necessarily satisfied with how you were doing and what you're doing, despite the fact you've always been doing it. So I think they're a really good place to begin when talking about career planning, and a really good thing to be consciously reflecting of and sort of interrogating over the course of a career. The next thing I sort of want to move on to is, I guess, about creating a context for ourselves and our own careers. My experience definitely as an actor has been that a lot of the ways in which I used to measure my own career was by what jobs I had. And if I had a job, great. If I didn't, then I was, in a very binary way, failing. And I think a lot of the way in which us as artists, whether we are writers, directors, visual artists, anyone that's freelance in the creative industry, a lot of the ways, unfortunately, I think that we measure our career is either by others that are doing what they're doing in the world, or maybe by the things, the sort of products of our work, as opposed to the process of it. So a really, I guess, useful, and this is incredibly simplistic, but it's been almost universally useful with the people that I've worked with. A way of creating our own context for ourselves really quickly is just to create a bit of a scaling system for ourselves. So if you were to either imagine or draw a line between 0 and 10 and mark it, from 1 all the way up, and imagine 10 being that point at which represents the most meaningful or satisfying place in your own career. So what is that ultimate thing that you want to be doing? What does that feel like? What's that average day? What are the kind of things you're doing there? If that is a 10, and the decision to embark on your current path, current career choice was a 0. So that was for me in art class at 16, deciding to go for acting and not art. It was a good choice. But whatever that moment was for you, marking that as a 0, and then just taking a moment to sort of instinctively mark where you are. So what number on that line from 0 to 10 are you at currently? Now, this is quite simplistic, but what's useful is that I think as creatives, we're often lost in this sort of intangible way of marking for ourselves where our careers are. And this begins to focus in for ourselves. So by marking that number, whatever it is, it does two things. One, it grounds us to know where we kind of are in our own sort of mental conception of our careers, but it also is useful in looking at how we might move forward. It's not so important as to where that number is on that line, whether it's a 2 or an 8 or a 5. There's benefits to all of them. But the important thing is that we begin to ground ourselves on it and recognize that there has been a bit of a journey already that has a lot of experience and value and resources. So we've come a distance already, but also it allows us to pinpoint what we might need to do next. So if, for example, you are at a 5 or a 4 on that spectrum, then it's about marking for yourself what are the milestones between, just imaginary, what are those milestones between where you are now and where you want to go? Some key ones might come to mind about, if you're a writer, what might those milestones be? It also takes us out of the sort of quagmire of not knowing where to go next or what to do next, by really being able to sort of chunk down what a next action might be in relation to that ultimate sort of most meaningful endpoint that we're looking for. So quite often when we're thinking about, I guess, those greater things we want to do, they can seem so big and so beyond our current level of capability that we're sort of, lost by the thought of how big or impossible they might be. So this is a useful tool to be able to go, well, if I am at a 4, what would represent a 5? Or what would represent a 4.1? And we can often neglect those very tiny, small movements forward, but they are the key ones that create a bit of momentum for us, but also over time as well, a bit of confidence in our ability to be able to identify for ourselves what is that next step. And there is always a point 1. There's always one smaller step that we can take in a direction towards where we're ultimately wanting to go. So it's good to make that really specific for yourself. Whatever that point 1 is, whether it's an email or a conversation you might have, there's always one nearby. So that as a way of, I guess, being able to create an internal context for our careers is a really useful starting point, because it's something that we've got complete control over. It's autonomous and it's intrinsic to ourselves. And it takes us out of that space of judging ourselves against unrealistic ideals, wherever they might be, or against others who obviously have their own unique path that they're on. So it's a way about reclaiming our own sense of autonomy around our career choices and how we might begin to move forward in that way. The next thing I sort of want to look at is the way in which we might think about our careers and the ways in which we might think about the challenges that we are facing. And not all thinking is equal, I'm sure we know. So I think often when I found myself thinking about my own career, it was more often ruminating than reflecting. I think there's a clear distinction to make between the two. I can often spend a lot of time just thinking about my career or thinking about, what I might do and what would be nice. But the difference between that kind of rumination and reflective thinking is that with reflective thinking, we're very consciously drawing on what's working, what isn't working. And what we can learn from that and how we specifically apply it to what we do next. Ruminating is very much just having a look without drawing any specifics from what we might use next with that. And another form of thinking around that as well is sort of critical thinking around, well, what are the things that are ultimately influencing me on my career? So sometimes we can be influenced by ideas that are not necessarily our own. So we might have a sense of what it means to be a writer or an artist or an actor that might be more social than personal. So we might be working off of an idea that says actors should be A, B, and C, and therefore I should be doing those things, which can often be very distant to what I actually want in my own career. So critical thinking, and there's a bit more in the workbook about that, really helps us to, I guess, uncover what my thinking is opposed to the broader socialized version of it. But the one I want to look at now, and then we might pop this up on the screen too, is just a really simple sort of solution-focused way of thinking. You can see up here, this is a very binary way of looking at it too. But this is used in lots of other sort of industries, whether it comes to management and consultancy and different ways in which institutions and larger organizations might craft their own path forward. But I think it's equally useful for individual freelance creatives, in fact, particularly useful, I think. So this is a sort of solution-focused approach towards our thinking and how we might approach our career, the next steps, and the problems we might face as we go through that. So on the problem-focused side, obviously, this reminds me of conversations that I have with actors whenever we have a pint. It can typically fall into, with our peers, this form of problem-focused thinking, which is, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, apportioning blame and control, ruminating on the causes in the past as to why we are in the place that we are, that ruminating as opposed to reflective thinking. The expert knows best is not to denounce experts, they're great. But what that is more about is the idea that the thinking that might be most useful to me is in the hands of others as opposed to my own exclusively, focusing overly on weaknesses and deficiencies. And we all get lost in complications when we come up against problems and defining it as opposed to thinking about what we might do. The solution-focused approach, and this as an approach has got a strong evidence base to it. There's about 20 years worth of research behind this as a form of thinking that is useful, and it's found that it's about 80% more useful than a problem-focused approach. So the solution-focused approach very much looks at what's wanted. So it starts fundamentally in a different position. And the analogy that I like to use and that I like in relation to this is the idea that if you're on a plane and it's going down, because the engine isn't working, a problem-focused approach says, well, let's focus all of our attention exclusively on the engine because that is the thing that is wrong. A solution-focused approach would look at where we ultimately want to be in order to create more options, more choices for ourselves. It doesn't mean we're ignoring the problem, we're creating more options. So a solution-focused approach might say, well, ultimately I want to be on the ground, safe, or at least off this aircraft. And that might lead us to considering other options like, well, is there a parachute available? What other routes off of this plane are there? And those other options we miss, we're blinkered to if we're focused solely on the problem. So a solution-focused approach doesn't ignore the problem, but it simply jumps immediately to what that ideal version is, not because it's a blinkered, optimistic way of thinking, but because that will create more options for us. It creates more of a things for us to latch onto. So it very much asks what's wanted, what's working. When I'm talking to creatives about where they ideally want to be in their careers, often a lot of that is already happening for them in the present. So if I'm talking to a writer who wants to be, I don't know, writing a massive new play that hits Broadway, they're probably already writing, and they probably already have a piece that they're working on, or they're already engaged with a few theatres in some places. So this, what's working, is a way of leveraging what's currently working well for us at the moment. That is also a part of that ultimate ideal. So we're drawing threads between that idealized future and what's currently working for us at the moment, and kind of connecting the two of them, making a bridge between where we are now and where we want to be. It's inherently about progress. So the questions that we're asking are very much about, how could this work for me? What might be the next step? It's got a very different emotional feel to a problem focus, and that's one of the reasons why it works so well, because the emotions associated with solution focused thinking are so much more positive and so much more engaging. Even the word solution focused sounds more appealing to me than spending a half an hour talking about problems, which could be useful. Influence as opposed to control. Quite often we can, I think, stall ourselves by thinking, well, there's a lot of things I do not have control over, and so, why start? And so what we're looking at again and again is, where is my influence here? What can I begin to move by myself and with others? It's inherently about collaboration. So it's inherently about the people around me who know more about this or who could be of help. One of my sort of favorite questions at the end of a coaching session is, who can help you with this? And there's always 4 or 5 people that someone realizes for the first time that actually, yeah, this thing I've been trying to solve by myself, there's a lot of people in my close circle or my peers who can help. And actually, if you drill down into that and ask again, well, who else can help me? There's usually a sort of a second tier beyond that of people who might be in a network associated with mine, who maybe I've not met with, but I could conceivably get in touch with, who could be quite useful as well. So solution focus is very much about this collaborative approach. It fundamentally looks at resources and strengths. So by resources, it means, what are the resources that we have that we might, in some cases, discount that could be used. So we can often discount, I guess, some of the experiences that we've had, some of the training that we've already done. When we're lost in a problem-focused approach, we tend to neglect those resources. And sometimes it's about looking at those more carefully. What have I done? What are the skills that I do have? How can they be used now? And there's a lot of research around strengths as well, and identifying the particular ones that you have. And we know that when we lean more into those strengths, we identify them for ourselves, we use more of ourselves cognitively and physically, and it creates a bit more sustainable change than the opposite. Simplicity in actions. It's very much going, what is the easiest way forward? So it's very much about refining down as to what is that next step, and actions. So we're moving from that rumination and reflection to, what are we exactly going to do next as a result of this? So I think this as an approach, and I think it's typified actually in the way that, over the last 18 months, the way which I guess certain institutions within, Irish theatre sector have worked. I mean, the POP payment was clearly a problem-focused result. People aren't working, people need money, and so let's provide them with money. I think the NFCA did a great job with a solution-focused approach around, universal basic income is clearly a solution-focused approach. So not what's going to solve the immediate problem, but where do we ultimately want to be? What are the long-term solutions? And how can we begin to use the situation we're in to move more towards those? So I think this is a style of thinking, when we're looking at the challenges and our next steps in our careers, is really a key one. So there's more about that in the workbook as well. But like I said, there's a lot of research behind that as well. So it's a really useful one to dig into. The next thing we're going to look at a little bit is just this next slide, which is, for me, I think it's really important within the arts in particular to recognize that, the personal, for me, very much is the professional. There's not a clear delineating line between what we're doing as artists and the sort of lives we live. They very much are woven together. And so for me, when I'm working with creatives and when I'm thinking about my own career, it's important to think about it in a kind of a wider context of my life. And that's particular, in some ways, that's a preemptive thing. I find that with these categories that I have up here, when they are not in place or not working for us in a satisfying way, it's when we begin to notice sort of professional problems as well. So the first one we have up here is lifestyle. Now, I guess we can all dream and imagine perfect lifestyles for ourselves, but we will have a preference. Every individual that I talk to when I'm coaching will have a preference as to the kind of ways in which they want to work. How many days do they want to work? When is the best time for them to do their creative work? Morning, afternoon? I saw an Irish theatre artist on Twitter recently saying that they, didn't want to work Mondays. Actually, they needed Mondays for themselves, and that was a choice that they made, which I thought was great. It's about asking that same lifestyle question for yourself and saying, well, how do I really want my life to be? What's the experience of it on a daily basis? And recognizing perhaps how different that might be to where I am at the moment, and what small changes there might need to be. Quite often, I guess I hear people saying maybe that, professionally I have exactly what I need, but I'm just not seeing my kids enough. I'm not getting out to do things I want to do. So although we might ignore lifestyle for sometimes the benefit of professional means, actually in the long run, it ends up getting in the way. It's a bit of a spoke in the wheel. So by considering it preemptively and just looking at, well, what is the ideal that I want, and making it a part of that career plan, making it a part of the process that I go in when I'm thinking about my professional development, I think is really important. This impact element, I think, ties into that solution-focused approach of what our influence is. I think a great thing to consult with yourself about as an artist is, what is the impact I want to make on those around me in many ways, just by being who I am as an artist? What is the impact you want to have on yourself? And, in relation to that is, what is the experience I want to have by being an artist in the world? We can spend a lot of time thinking about the marks we need to hit professionally, but actually, how do I want to be as a result of this? Do I want to be, more educated? Do I want to feel like I'm just having more fun, that I'm collaborating with more people? What's my own personal experience do I want to have? What's the impact on friends and family? How do I want, the experience of me being in their lives as an artist to be? Community and peers. A lot of this impact is about generating ideas for ourselves about how we might begin to engage in other areas of our lives with the art that we have, and really sort of tying together the personal and the professional, the way in which we work as artists. So what is the impact I want to have on my community, the people around me, either online or in real life, through being an artist? What things could I do as an actor, as a writer, that might engage that way? Peers and profession. I'd imagine TheatreMaker.ie might have had a conversation around this at some point to go, well, how do we want to impact our professional environment and our peers? What do we want to create for them? Do we want to create a situation where they are more informed of what's going on during a pandemic? Then that's something maybe we can investigate doing. And thus we all find ourselves here talking about this. So thank you, TheatreMaker.ie. And then the wider context of profession, culture, and world, as grandiose as it is. But by looking at these, I think we can begin to recognize our own influence and starting points for ourselves. It's a uniquely empowering position to take, I think, as an artist, when thinking about your profession and your own professional development, as opposed to what's not there. What are the places that I've not quite got to yet? This impact level is very engaging for us. Really briefly, because I'm conscious of time, are these ideas of finance and emotion. We could spend a good hour or two talking about finance, but I think the key things to look at is that it's a part of our experience, and there are preferences and ideals we will have around that, and to acknowledge them. How much do I need to be making? How much would I want to make, ideally? And what is something that I'm happy to work for? Ultimately, if we're working over a long period of time for money that is continually less than what we would feel we're happy to, that's going to build in a bit of resentment over time. And so to be asking ourselves that question is, what am I happy to work for? And just marking that for yourself, so that as time goes on, that is something that we can begin to nudge towards. Because look, I'm going to work better and I'm going to enjoy those environments more if I'm working for a level of money that really connects and does what it needs to do for me in my life as a whole. So we know that when we ignore that, it obviously becomes a problem. So just bringing our awareness to it can often be enough. And this last part, I guess, is the emotional aspect of it. A lot of people leave a lot of careers, despite them being massively successful and hitting all of the previous marks, because of their emotional experience in a day-to-day. They just feel like they are stressed all the time, or they are anxious all the time, or they're always thinking about other things. So this is about preemptively asking ourselves, what is the emotional experience that we want to have? So actually, as I go about my day, trying to find work or thinking about my career, how do I really want to feel? What do I want that to be? Do I want to feel like it is more of an adventure than a trial? And if I do want to feel like my day-to-day as an actor, as a writer, is more of an adventure, how can I begin to bring that into my own sort of day-to-day? So what could be a more adventurous way of beginning that day, or thinking about the work, or approaching the things that I typically do as a part of my kind of part of my creative practice? So by just tuning in to this emotional level, which is always there, it's a part of our experience. So by ignoring it in the long run, career-wise, I think it begins to drag at us. So preemptively, when thinking about our careers, just consulting that part of ourselves, what is that emotional experience we want to have on the daily, and how can we begin to change what we're doing to bring more of that? Where is fun? Quite often talking to creatives, it's a lot about what is missing, where I want to get, how do I build certain capacities, but where is the fun? How can more fun be brought in to that area? So what I'm presenting really here are some perspectives in general about contextualizing our careers for ourselves and moving it from an extrinsic form of judgment into more of our own autonomous intrinsic form of it. We're also talking about the idea of linking it into core values. So what is really important to us as opposed to what we might perceive the industry wanting or needing. So grounding, I guess, our career planning in that. And like I say, there's more in the workbook around that. A little bit around the styles of thinking that we employ. And we do have choice about that. The ways in which we choose to think about these things, that's something within our control. So we can choose to be more solution focused about the current challenges that we are facing and also our careers as a whole. And then finally bring in this, I guess, holistic sort of whole life perspective to our careers and recognizing that if we're not paying attention or bringing in these other parts into our career planning, that they're going to get in the way eventually. They're going to cause us some difficulties. And while we might be professionally successful by going through this in another means, we might not still have that same level of meaning and satisfaction, which I think ultimately is what we're really looking for, in many cases at least. So yeah, this is what we're looking at, a much more holistic version of, I guess, deciding on our careers for ourselves and moving it forward in an incremental way. But that's a brief overview as to, I guess, the approach that I would take when working with freelancers, just because I guess, all of our careers are quite unique journeys and quite ambiguous. And so it's worthwhile, I think, being reflective and critical about the ways in which you might think forward on them. But if you're interested in any of those ideas or more of them, or you want to spend some more time than this half an hour really digging into them, like I said, there's a workbook that we'll share a link to that is free and requires no personal information. And you can just sit with that with an hour or two and work it through for yourself and see what new options, what new ideas come up to give you a bit more momentum and options in your own career. So thank you very much for your time. And if you're listening, I think I'm going to hand back to Micheál or the great people at TheatreMaker.ie.
It's been great listening to Andrew, and we'll be right back with him. But I want to quickly remind you that you can pledge your support for TheatreMaker.ie on our website at TheatreMaker.ie/donate. We'll post a link in the comments now. Now let's go back to Andrew and make sure to pop your questions in the comments in the chat. Back to you, Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Micheál. So this is obviously an interactive form as well, although you might not have thought it by the way I've led the last 30 minutes. But yeah, if you have any comments or questions specifically, feel free to pop them into, I assume, a chat somewhere. And I'll do my best to give another perspective on them or tell you how I might go about looking at that if it was in coaching, or ask any questions you might have around it. And I'll do my best to provide another perspective on it. But it's great that TheatreMaker.ie I think have provided a space for these conversations. Yeah.
A question from social media, Andrew. People are wondering, how should folks approach early in their career?
Yeah, great question. And this is something I've noticed working with, working with students over the course of the last 18 months. And one thing I have noticed is that there's a massive amount of expectations on us when we are leaving, I guess, training in particular, about, where we should be in relation to our careers. And that's always an interesting, interesting thing to separate for yourself is those shoulds and musts. So if we're beginning, there's quite often a sense of, well, I should be at this point in my career already. I should be doing the following things. And to separate that as ideas that are not maybe fully our own and go, well, where do I feel I want to be next? So that the solution-focused approach when it comes to thinking about your career at the very beginning is very much rooted in where you ultimately want to be with it. So I guess the questions that I'd be looking at for you there would be, what is that ending point? So where do you want to be in your career, and jumping to that place first, and then moving back to going, okay, in the context of where I ultimately want to be, what might be the next step? And another benefit of, I guess, using that solution-focused approach is that it's ever adaptable. So what it isn't is it's not a very strict linear plan. Strict linear plans work in some environments. In the arts sector, I think we can all recognize how they might not be as useful. So by the solution-focused approach simply means that in the context of where I am now and where I ultimately want to be, what is the next best step I can take that's within my control? So what's one thing that I can do? So by taking that step, we typically find ourselves in a new position and things shift. I often notice that when I'm coaching someone, we might do a little bit of solution-focused approach towards where they are in their career. They might identify for themselves maybe a couple of really simple, easy things that they can do. And then when they come back in the next week, actually things have shifted in quite a big way, because the one conversation they had, the one email they sent, the one bit of research they did have opened up a whole new version of options available to them. And so things begin to shift. So I guess one thing to think about in your career at the beginning is not to put the pressure on trying to construct a really linear and detailed plan for yourself. Really, it is about going, what is the next best step for me in context of where I want to go? And taking those steps, exploring with those ideas, and then again checking in with yourself and going, okay, well, where am I now? What now is the next best step? But always in context to where you ultimately want to be. We can find ourselves, I guess, getting distracted or getting lost in the problem more than the solution. So really leaning towards the solution as opposed to locking ourselves into problems like, I'm not getting work. How do I fix the not getting work problem? By jumping to the solution-focused thing, it might be, well, if I ultimately want to be, running my own theatre company and creating my own work, what part of that can I begin now? I can still look for jobs, but is there a part of that idea of creating my own work that I can begin, that I can explore and play with? So yeah, that's my elongated answer to that one, Micheál.
I suppose it kind of ties in with our next question as well. Like, we're 16 months into a pandemic. Emotion is playing a lot on the decisions we're making. So how do we negotiate it like an emotional and rational decision?
Yeah, the first thing is to not separate them so much. There is a difference, I think. Look, we are a system of thinking and feeling. So to kind of cut out the emotion or to attempt to is sort of to deny our basic humanity. And so, but we can sort through them. So I guess one thing to do is to feel the feelings you're currently feeling and to acknowledge and be aware of them, as opposed to trying to move against them. So I guess in the context of a pandemic, there can be a lot of feelings around anxiety, or we all would have felt severe disorientation, to use it mildly, at many points throughout it. One thing to do would be to recognize what that feeling is. So I am feeling quite anxious and worried about what might be next for me. But I guess one school of thought in psychology would say that we can recognize it and then begin to make other decisions for ourselves, or we can stay in that emotion for a long period of time. So I guess the analogy I like there is the idea of having a hand on a hot hob. Of course, we need to feel those emotions and feel the pain of them to react to them. But there comes a point after that which we may be choosing in some ways to keep our hand on that hob, to keep those feelings and to play into them and to play into that progress or to play into that problem focus. When actually, we need to notice what those feelings are and then begin that process, which I think needs to be a more of a reflective one. So it does require us to step out of the firefighting and the panic of the daily actions we might be taking to solve these problems. It does require a little moment by yourself where you can, I guess, separate yourself from the normal course of life and get reflective and critical about what might those next steps be, or working with a friend in that same way and just saying, look, don't tell me what to do. Don't give me any advice. Just let me think and let me share some ideas and just listen. That's a really useful thing to do. So that's a clear way of making a distinction for me, not ignoring those emotions, recognizing them there, but also recognizing that there's a point at which we can take our hand off that hob and begin to ask more solution-focused questions.
Like maybe even journaling would be helpful in those, to recognize those emotions as they come and to understand them.
Yeah, there's loads of ways in which we can go about doing that. So there's excellent resources in relation to mindfulness and meditation and journaling, and there's a lot of evidence base for all of those around doing that. So absolutely, the most important thing about that is finding one that works for you and doing it in a way that does not make you feel ultimately guilty for not doing it. So if you are going to set up a practice like that for yourself, check in as to how useful it is for yourself, but also ensure that whatever you're doing, if you miss a couple of sessions of meditating or writing a journal, make sure that you're not jumping into a place of judgment. They're only as useful in so much as we're not judging ourselves by the times in which we don't do them. But yeah, that would be a great way of, I guess, just acknowledging what's there for yourself and sorting through it.
Interesting. For next question anyway, like talking about mentors, how would you recommend going about approaching potential mentors?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think, well, there's lots of ways in which you could do this. And when I'm working one-to-one, the best way is the way that is the best for that person. So a lot of what I do in coaching isn't directed. So it's not about me going, here's my top 3 ways that I think you should go about connecting with people, just because it sort of runs contrary to their own experience, their own natural strengths, where they are at the moment. So typically in a coaching context, I'd be working with that person to find their own best way of doing that. But some of the ways in which I've recognized perhaps people find some difficulty with that could be around the fundamental status that they assign themselves and that they assign to the mentor. So there can be sometimes a bit of a cognitive barrier. We can imagine people are, for want of a better phrase, more worthy than us. And so we can imagine that, we can make a lot of assumptions about the situation. So we can assume they might not be interested in talking to us. They can assume that they might just reject us. We can assume that, they might send a very negative response. So the first thing to do is to acknowledge those assumptions for what they are, which is assumptions. And maybe check into, if we're thinking about reaching out to a mentor, going, well, what's the worst case scenario? And typically people say, well, I guess the worst case scenario is they say, thank you, but no, thank you, I'm busy, which is not as bad as most people think when they're thinking assumption wise. Also, what's the best case scenario? So if I do reach out to that person, in a best case scenario, they might go, you're just the kind of person I wanted to kind of pass on my infinite knowledge and wisdom to. So there's a best case in there that we can be sometimes biased towards thinking about. And then if you want to bring in a bit of reality for yourself, if you feel that those twos are too extreme, then, what is in the context of those two, what is, a potentially more realistic expectation to have in that? Yeah, they might be free, they might get in touch, they might reach back. So one is about assumptions in that way. And the other for me is about the status that you might be giving that other person in relation to yourself. So if we're looking at that interaction, how we might connect to that person from a place of, I am less worthy than you, that's going to get in the way of how we might reach out in that way. And so, really consciously going to yourself that, they may have significant more experience, but fundamentally as a human, we exist on a level of equality and we are equal. So, how, if I was to have an adult to adult conversation and I was to be direct and take out my own sort of sense of worthiness in this, whether I think they're a higher status or lower status, what would that email sound like? And maybe it's just a very clear and direct one going, I'm looking to find out more about how I might progress in my own career. I've really appreciated the ways in which you've gone about doing that for yourself. I wonder if you'd be interested in having a talk and sharing some ideas with me. So yeah, acknowledging the shift in status, if there is one present, and then acknowledging and unpicking some of those assumptions that might be distorting reality for ourselves a little bit.
About kind of a mindset thing, I suppose.
Yeah. A big part of, I guess, any change that we might be making in our career is about drawing in, mindset, like emotions, play a big part in the decisions that we make and how we lead that forward. So mindset is a crucial change. If we just do different things, but the mindset isn't, it comes into that how idea. My mindset isn't attuned as well, or if I'm not making changes there, then the actions that I might take over time might sort of whittle away. So incorporating the mindset, incorporating the things that I'm doing, and also the behaviors around that, and I guess environment would be another aspect of that sort of change as well, of going, where do I need to be, what environments are more useful to me? But yeah, definitely mindset is a thing to be considering when we are making bigger changes, definitely.
What would you mean by environments? Is in like a physical space, like the difference between Dublin and London, or is it something even more personal than that?
Oh, well, it could be that. I guess one way in which we can look at structured change or structured development over time on an individual way is to look at behaviors, action, environment, and mindset. So, if I want to be moving from, say, writing into directing, or moving a career in a certain direction, so if I want to be doing things I'm not currently doing, we know that if we just focus on the level of actions, that can be useful. What's more useful is to take a wider perspective of that and go, okay, so these are the actions that I could be taking. I could be starting to investigate directing. What could I change in my environment that might help me with that? So that might be about online, what groups am I going to engage with more? What circles of friends maybe are more involved in that area of directing? What can I change in my actual environment around me, in my house, flat, wherever I am, to remind me that this is an area that I'm interested in now? We know that feeds in the way that we think about things as well. And we can tie that into behaviors as well. So if perhaps we change the creative practice that we might have in some way to incorporate where we want to go. So if I'm going to take, say, 10 minutes in the morning as a part of my creative practice to read a bit more about directing or looking at that, we know that if we're creating change in all those areas, it's much more likely to be long-term sustainable as well. So yeah, that could mean moving from London to Dublin, but it depends on your own personal circumstances, of course. But yeah, I hope that makes it a bit more clear, Micheál, does it?
Yeah, of course. It's like, I suppose it does really. Yeah, I have to thank you so much for your time, Andrew, and giving us so much of your time for the festival. It's been really helpful and really interesting to talk to you. We posted a link to Andrew's workbook in the comments, and you can check out his website at andrewmacklin.com. And don't forget, you can support TheatreMaker by donating at TheatreMaker.ie/donate. Your support will help us keep the conversations going. And we'll be right back in just a moment, where I'll be replaying an interview with Dr. Charlotte Macgyver and visiting the rehearsal room with the Taste in Your Mouth company and their show Narcissus as part of the Dublin Fringe. We're proud of the hard work and dedication we've put into TheatreMaker, and only by knowing where we've been can we know where we are going. Remember, you can pledge your support for TheatreMaker on our website at TheatreMaker.ie/donate. Now let's take a look back at our interview with Dr. Charlotte Macgyver, followed by a live glimpse into the rehearsal room from Archway and Taste in Your Mouth. And they're showing Narcissus as part of the Dublin Fringe Festival.
I'm joined now by Dr. Charlotte Macgyver, a lecturer in drama and theatre studies at National University of Ireland, Galway. Charlotte currently serves as Deputy Head of the School of English and Creative Arts, as well as Postgraduate Director in Drama and Theatre Studies. Thank you for meeting with me today, Charlotte.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
First of all, can you tell me a bit about your own studies? What drew you to studying theatre and what inspired you to follow that route?
So when I was very young, my parents one summer took me to see the summer children's play at a university about an hour away from where we lived, DeSales College. And I sat there, and I think it was Frog and Toad, a story from Wind in the Willows. And I said to my mother, I want to be in theater. And from that day, that was kind of my conviction and my interest. So I got involved in community theater in the States, where I lived in Philadelphia from about the age of 9 and never looked back. When I went to college at first, I applied to both actor training programs and got into a few in the States, and then also liberal arts colleges because I had quite good academics as well. And my parents really, I suppose, encouraged me in the direction of the liberal arts program, which at the time I was like, but I know what I want and I know what I want to do. But they were absolutely right, because as a young woman, particularly now, 20-ish years ago, the range of roles in theater besides actor was not something that I really understood. It didn't even strike me until I was in university that one could be a director and a woman at the same time. But I have to say that the big shift then for me came when I took Theater History 1 in my first year of college. And it was thinking about the way in which theater practice and production could influence history and society, as well as be a way to think about history and society as it's lived in the present moment. It's an index for how we can understand ourselves and our role in history. And this was just intoxicating to me. And from that moment onwards, I wanted to do it all. I wanted to be a practitioner. I wanted to be a scholar. I wanted to write. I wanted to direct. I wanted to do everything. And as I got near the end of university, even theater studies as a field wasn't big enough for me. I began to be reading around a lot in something called performance studies, which is, I suppose, bringing the field of theater studies, anthropology, and cultural studies together so that you're analyzing everything from rituals, religious history, up through, May I Destroy You and Normal People, and bringing all that dialogue together. So I went to get my PhD in performance studies, but that was very much based within the theater department. So I never strayed very far from the theater from that first impulse into DeSales College. And now, of course, I work at NUI Galway in the theater department.
Wow, you have so many strings to your bow, Charlotte, and it's hugely impressive. And I've noticed that there seems to be themes around identity and how you stage that in your own academic studies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So, my accent is obviously American, and I've just talked about growing up in the States, but my father is actually Irish. He's from Dundalk, and he fell in love with my mother one summer while on a J1 in the United States. And after 6 years of courting before WhatsApp and Skype and all of this, they got married and he moved to the States. So I grew up in not only an Irish American family, but an Irish American immigrant family. And so I was always aware, I suppose, of identity, of ethnicity, of what it meant to have a complicated life story. And I grew up in Philadelphia as well, which is a very diverse city, and was one of my most formative experiences was getting to go downtown to the city of Philadelphia theater summer camp, where for the first time outside my neighborhood Catholic school, I met young people of color, Jewish people, people who are Christian but not Catholic. And that really transformed my worldview. So as I got more into the study of theater from an academic perspective, as well as making my own theater, I suppose all that influence and background came into the work, came into the research. Something curious that I discovered about the way in which other Americans dealt with my own Irish identity was by having very fixed and stereotypical and outdated ideas of Irishness. So some of my research, which might be what you're referring to, looks at migration, interculturalism, race, and ethnicity in Ireland today, because I became very interested in trying to think about how do we tell a fuller story of Ireland. Now, this would have been before I lived here, but coming back and forth from the States. So I suppose what I've learned in my career is that you never actually leave anything behind, and the work I'm doing now around sexual consent, sexuality, sexual identity, that has been a passion of me since I was a very young college student as well. But at that time, this was way before Me Too. It was a whole other couple waves forward of feminism. People said to me, if you are a woman, oh, you're a feminist, oh, you're just going to do gender. You're just going to be in this pigeonholed box. So I tried to carry that interest forward, but do it in a way that I suppose if it was now, perhaps I would have just kept it in that stream. But I suppose it took me actually almost 20 years into my career to have the courage to kind of full on go into the gender and sexuality angle.
Yes, and I'm actually interested in your PhD in performance studies in particular, which looked at race, gender and immigration in post-Celtic Tiger Ireland. So you've spoken a little bit about what drew you to that topic, but what did you find at the end of it all?
I suppose there are not huge layers of things that I found. One, as of the most recent census, we are 70% non-Irish born in this country, meaning that we've either our third country nationals coming from countries outside of the European Union, or people who have not availed of Irish citizenship who live within Ireland. That's a huge number and is a huge jump. It's from less than 5% in 1996. So, scratch beneath the surface of Irish society. And I see this in my own classrooms here now, having lived and worked in Ireland for almost a decade, that who is coming into our universities has changed hugely, because the generation that moved here in the mid 90s, they have children that are coming of age. So number one, I found, just the statistics, show us what I'm also then looking for within the arts. I suppose as well, if you only looked at the stages of the Abbey or of Druid or of the bigger houses in the country, you might not see a lot of evidence of interculturalism in the arts, which led me to look more broadly within theater and performance practice from the spectrum from professional to community arts, as well as across art forms, looking at photography, looking at dance, looking at the way in which community arts is a really important site for people to be thinking about changing identities within Ireland or exploring artistically after folks have arrived in the country. So it really ultimately felt like I needed the performance studies worldview in order to tell the story that I was seeing emerge. And now we're seeing the generation who's grown up fully within Ireland come into universities, enter into more mainstream arts careers. But it was very important to me politically and ethically, I suppose, to tell the fullest story that started from the roots and didn't just wait, for the Nigerian Irish John Millington Synge, which I think a lot of people are sometimes satisfied to do. But I think we need more proactive dialogue happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other ways that you would advise people to encourage more diversity in how they work? What advice would you give to, say, theatre companies, how they work in that way?
I suppose it starts with always questioning about who is in the room, who's not in the room, who's not in the audience. But we have seen in other countries, not so much here, that often then the idea of, okay, well, what counts as diversity is who's in the seats. So let's try to get people as ticket buyers into the house. But it's much more complicated than that. And it's very, very hard work. And most companies in the country have made a real effort over the years and have had to kind of repeatedly re-engage to work from that grassroots in terms of the programming that is going to bring people in, projects which can involve people, as well as making the arts seem open and viable as a career, particularly to people whose roots in terms of decades or generations living in Ireland may not be as firm. So I think even if you're coming from a white Irish middle class background, we deal with this all the time at open days, go to get a theater degree, that was a hard enough question pre-COVID. And now we're in an even more perilous moment of the world and the arts landscape. So, we need to look at that as well in terms of the sustainability of artistic careers and how that sustainability or that financial precarity also plays into who gets to come and try to have a seat at the table. So it's a multi-level, I suppose, a totally ongoing process, but I suppose we have to have the courage to keep having those conversations, not just in the moments where we have a flashpoint, like say the most recent wave of Black Lives Matter in the US. I think looking to our own Waking the Feminists report from now, I think it was 2015, I think 2016, the actual report came out, did such a brilliant job of Leon Bell saying to us, we need to keep counting the number of women that are represented in theater. I would say it's the same for looking at minority ethnic groups as well with on our stages and the kinds of roles for women and minority ethnic actors, but it does take ongoing effort.
Yes, so we have to keep working at that and looking at ourselves. And yeah, you're absolutely right there, Charlotte. So you actually spent some time working in America, and you've been working here since 2012. Have you found any differences between the two?
I suppose, I've reached a funny turning point where, I lived as many years in the Bay Area getting my PhD and then working as I have now being at NUI Galway. I would say the differences that struck me when I first got here is that the US theater departments are all incredibly well-resourced to an almost obscene level. And they're quite, there's a lot of commonality from university to university or even community college to college in how training programs happen, what people's idea of acting is, what is the tension between theory and practice within the US landscape. What I found here is everything is obscenely well resourced as it is in the States, where you'd have 20,000 euro projectors in every theater. No, however, the opportunity to actually really push forward thought and theater practice in a way that involves people in the creation at every stage, in having to get in there and figure out how to do it themselves, rather than have this very kind of machine parts model where only one person knows how to work the lights and one person is the actor, and so on and so forth. I can't imagine going back now to working the other way. We've kind of distilled this within the National University of Ireland Galway programs down to the thinking theater maker, that you should be able to turn your hands to many different things within a theater, that the aspiration is the career of somebody like Michaela Cole, who of course has now gotten such fabulous reviews for I May Destroy You, who has wrote and production managed and gained control of that production on her own terms, as well as starring within it. That's the kind of person that we are trying to bring out of our programs, where I felt even from a very young theater student in the States in a liberal arts college, but that still was run very much according to a conservatory model. I was always being told to act, not think in some of my classes. And then in other classes, it was about the reading and the thinking, but a lot of anxiety about the kind of values placed on certain kind of acting or performance. So I find there's freedom here, as well as the completely integrated link to the industry.
Yeah, so you find then that there's more, I suppose, all-rounders, people who have studied all areas of theatre. I noticed actually in the BA in Galway, you offer a lot of different classes, like theatre for younger audiences and children is a class that you which is hugely important, something that I'm quite passionate about myself. Musical theatre and arts management. So that's all, that all helps, I suppose, to contribute to someone coming out of the programme knowing all areas of the arts and then being able to decide, well, which area do I want to go into? to. So that's, it's fantastic. So as well as being a lecturer and a director, you also lead the Active Consent Programme's Creative Arts and Communications Unit. As if you needed another string to your bow, Charlotte, here's another one. So that creates theatre, film and social media content aimed at 16 to 24-year-olds on the subject of sexual consent. Hugely important work. Can you tell me about that, please?
It all started with a phone call, as I think most things do in Ireland, where a colleague who I didn't even know at the time called me up and said, I have a report about sexual assault, consent, and alcohol. I'm wondering if you can make a play out of it. And I said, well, that's not really how theater works. You don't just like take the report and then stage it. But, I'm interested in working with you on this, taking an ensemble of students and seeing if we react to those themes, what can we make together? And we devised a play first in 2014 that was then called 100 Shades of Grey. This was very soon after 50 Shades of Grey was released. And then we had a disclosure training with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre where they referred to what they deal with as 100 Shades of Grey. So that was the original iteration of the play, which was, unconnected scenes and monologues on the topic of sexual consent. We've workshopped it over the last 6 years. Our research has grown more and more extensive. I moved within the project into making short films in 2017, I believe, following an invitation actually to do a short film with the Manuel Riedo Foundation on the back of that play. And I suppose our story is a bit of a Cinderella story for academic research in that we are invited to pitch for funding with the Life's Too Good Foundation, who funds our work, and to reimagine what we were doing as a 4-year program, working not only with third-level institutions, but sports organizations and secondary school as well. And we're also developing a critical sexual media resource that also deals with pornography, aimed at secondary school students. So building on that, we worked with Rethink Ireland, and the social media, theater, and film piece of it fits into all of our programs, where we're designing interventions from the arts angle to go alongside everything that we do, because we believe that the dialogue that is possible through engaging with art, this is not a series of after school specials, it's art that is designed to have dialogue, to provoke, to continue conversations. As far as I'm aware, we're the only organization in Ireland and wider where we combine not only the research of the young people in terms of statistical research with the arts, with direct intervention, like our workshops and trainings. So it's a very special thing to be part of. And it's something that is driven by NUI Galway students and alumni who work with me on the programs and the things that we create.
Amazing. And have you had, what has the feedback been like from the students that have seen the work? Have conversations happened, have important conversations happened as a result of that work?
So on the back of the larger research grant, we did our first national tour of the play, now called The Kinds of Sex You Might Have at College, across Ireland. We visited 14 universities this past year before COVID struck, and we were actually fully booked for September and October before the world pandemic happened. The play runs in tandem often with our workshops, which are a dialogical 1-hour format in which people talk about what the definitions they're coming in with, and then have that challenged through research and the views of other young people. And what people talk about again and again is having a space opened up to talk about these ideas, to be critical about them, but to also be positive, because we come from a sex positive angle. We want people to have good and beautiful, satisfying sex when they're ready to have it. And we want to address men and women. We want to speak across genders, relationships, and sexualities. That was a real gap that I saw coming in to make this work, and why I thought the arts was so important, because so much it's just a male-female message. It's all about harm and risk, and we wanted to be broader and more positive with it, and our audiences really appreciate that from the feedback we've gotten.
Okay, wonderful, fantastic. So Galway has always been an epicenter for theatre and the arts, and NUIG has always had close links with that community long before the Drama and Theatre Studies programme existed. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. So the program that I am part of and where I run the postgraduate program, our department has existed within the university theoretically since, or not theoretically, actually since 2014. But then there was our MA course in drama was being taught from within English since 1999. And then we had our BA Connect come about in 2008, then joined by the BA in drama, theater, and performance. So there's that history within the university, but we had an opportunity actually when our building opened, the O'Donoghue Center in 2017. I was tasked with taking archival documents from the university of the building site and I suppose the surrounding area and making a short piece of, I suppose, documentary theater that was then voiced by 4 or 5 students. And one of the things that I discovered is back in the 1920s, when the Drama Society, if I'm correct, was founded, you had lecturers taking part in the Drama Society performing productions in town. There was this really thin membrane between the university and the city, and also a really complicated status of what constituted professional theater or theater that got a public and paying audience, which again is why I think it's important to look at that complication within Irish history. Of course, famously, our most famous and prize alums, Gary and Marie, started their careers on the campus of National University of Ireland, Galway, but so have countless others. And there's so many stories that you hear, such as our building site where the O'Donoghue Center happened. Apparently, it was not only occupied by the Drama Society and the Irish Drama Society at one point in time, but Fiona Shaw performed Medea in like a room full of puddles. So there is quite a hauntedness to Galway, where there are all these threads of history. It was the last place that Antonin Artaud visited before his final descent into madness. And I think that adds to something that is kind of permeates the air as people talk about, but then is backed up by the hard work of organizations like Mockness, Druid, the Galway International Arts Festival, Babero, where people are putting in the work and making use of all those shreds of inspiration that are there to be reinterpreted for today.
Yeah, so you mentioned so many theatre companies there, Charlotte, all of them originating in Galway. So why do you think, with all that I suppose drama and theatre studies richness coming from Galway, why did it take so long to establish the drama and theatre studies program at NUIG?
Well, I suppose the answer is not even just within an Irish ecosystem of theater programs. I think that globally, or when we say globally, maybe kind of within North America, Western Europe, there's a lot of anxiety about theater as an art form. There's a brilliant book by Shannon Jackson, Professing Performance, where she looks at the development of drama departments in the US out of English departments and the anxieties there, because drama was seen as a very coarse kind of occupation. It was a craft. It wasn't just about thinking with the mind. It was about using the body. It was about building things, building sets, painting things as if you were a laborer, right? So its relationship to higher education has always been fraught. I remember at the time that I interviewed here speaking about Trinity's drama department, there not being others whose reputation was as established or that I would have been aware of as an outsider interviewing for the job here. But it's not just us. And I see this even in our day-to-day lives, where it's like, can you pay for, these high vision goggles that we need as a piece of costume, right? And that does not fit with our procurement policy at all. But that's always what's attracted me to theater, the messiness, the anarchy, the idea that like you're within a university devising a play around sexual consent and having these edgy conversations, using it as a laboratory in which to reimagine or imagine different solutions for the real world. It's really special, but it makes people nervous in a good way.
Yeah. That's what we like, to make people nervous in our field, don't we? And make them feel something anyway. Yes, so NUIG, it offers both undergraduate and postgraduate courses in theatre studies, and obviously it is an academic institution. How important is it, do you think, to find a balance between the academic study and practice-based study? Because you mentioned a tension between those two things earlier on.
I think there can be a tension if you're not doing it right. So to come back to our key term that we live by within the department, the thinking theater maker, somebody who can turn their hands to all aspects of the craft, who know how to hang the light or do the costume sketch, but can also talk to you about, okay, what are the reasons I'm producing this play? What does it mean to do this play now? Or there aren't plays that fit what I'm trying to say. I'm going to go devise a piece of theater based on found testimony, or I am going to go create an installation about foster care in Ireland. Key to what we do into making that work is that we engage in practice as research at both an undergraduate and a postgraduate level. And what that means is you're using practice, usually theater practice or more broadly performance practice, as a way to find out answers, to pose questions, to generate new knowledge. So what comes out of that is really beautiful and interesting and rich pieces of theatrical work or performances, but they're also backed up by an understanding of the histories they're coming out of, what they might have to say to the wider world. So I think that we have really let ourselves down as an industry and as a field in telling people for so many generations to act, not to think, but we're having a generation come of age now who want to be in employment that they find ethically and politically in line with their beliefs and how they want to live in the world. And so I think that this synergy between theory and practice has never been needed more, and especially as our field is going to have such challenges to survive and to remain relevant, or we're constantly reinventing how we remain relevant post-COVID.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And post-COVID is definitely something that we have to start thinking about now as well, isn't it? Hopefully, we'll be coming out of it soon. Yeah. So what do you think the value of a degree program like yours is for budding theatre makers?
I think the value is that you come out knowing how to ask questions and find the solutions to problems that you're encountering. A pandemic hits and you decide to reinvent your project as an Enda Walsh radio play and have the ability through the infrastructure and the support in your course to go and to teach yourself a new skill in that moment. For students who've been involved with the active consent program over the years, they're coming out knowing how to portray a survivor of assault or indeed a perpetrator, but also somebody else within that story very competently in terms of a sound acting technique, but they're also seeing the work that they're doing influencing national policy in the area, and they also know how to write the scenes in which their character stars. Those are the kinds of versatile skills and vision that we need now to not only, I suppose, make a career for ourselves in the art, but to keep trying to change the world in the challenges that we are faced with again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding new ways now to reach our audiences. And as you mentioned, it is very important to have all that versatility, all those skills to do that now. So the DTS department at NUIG is still quite young, relatively speaking. And the landscape of theatre studies and training is ever evolving and growing in Ireland. How do you see your department developing in the future?
Well, I think that it comes out of that intersection, again, between the theory and the practice. It's not only my own consent project that is research driven in terms of how we are evolving practice and involving students in that. My colleague Patrick Lonergan has a project this year, Gendering the Canon, where they will be looking at plays and looking at how to bring more female theater artists from previous generations and this generation to voice through the productions that they'll be staging. My colleague Marianne Kennedy is head of the Garian Giria Irish Language Theatre Collective, which has involved our students in it at various points. My colleague Miriam Houghton works on the Tuam Oral Histories project and will be staging a new production with our students this coming year in some form or another based on that work. My colleague Ian R. Walsh is involved with the Circus project in Europe. So we see ourselves as not only imparting that craft that work within a classroom, within the technical theater working space, but involving them in pushing forward these stories, these histories, these innovations. So I think that we have really begun to unlock now across our staff how to do that and to how to keep that alive. And that's something that I never experienced within my own theater education in the States, and that I find to be very unique within Ireland as well as broader, because out of those opportunities, as we see more of an interest in heritage, in the supporting of communities, that's actually where a lot of employment opportunities are going to come from in the future as well. So it is pragmatic and it is political at the same time. And for us, that is constantly changing our game as these opportunities come along through our own research.
Yes, absolutely. And Charlotte, do you think that now, there's a lot of students out there that might be slightly fearful because they're studying theatre, at the moment with you guys, and they're seeing theatre closures all around, the country, the UK. What kind of, I suppose, advice or comfort would you provide to students now who are thinking about studying theatre, or who were thinking about studying theatre and now might be just a little bit apprehensive about it?
Well, I would say that, in this generation, even before COVID, and I suppose in my generation as well, there is not really anymore the thing as one career path that you follow through your life. And I'll go back to my example of my parents pushing me not to go to the conservatory in the United States, but to go to the liberal arts college. And I remember myself being divided, even in undergrad, between wanting to work for an NGO and be an activist and be a theater maker. And how could I do all those things? And I'm doing all that in my job at NUI Galway. And even to be an academic, you have to be able to work on all those different levels. So I would say, yes, come and study with us, and then you'll have a part in a West End show and be able to make your rent regularly. That's a promise that nobody can or should make. But in a program like ours, where you're studying our subject, which takes such a broad view of it, but then also another art subject to degree level, you have a variety of options, and you are going to be well suited to meet that world, to meet that workplace. There have been a lot of studies that have come out in the last couple of years that a drama student's profile is actually highly attractive to companies that work more broadly within the tech industry, who are looking for people who have that group work, that innovative thinking, etc. Sometimes those arguments make me uncomfortable because it seems like, there's maybe some pitfalls there or traps within that kind of an argument. But I do think that it is instructive. We're going to change a lot over the course of our lifetime. So go where your passion is and go where you're going to learn to work in this world in many different ways.
That's a lovely answer, Charlotte. And on that note, my final question is, if there are people out there that do want to study theatre, why should they choose the drama course at NUIG?
You should choose the drama course at NUIG because we believe in the power of the ensemble. You are going to be part of a bigger thing, a bigger project, a bigger group that is full of heart, full of passion, full of power and determination. You're going to be linked in with major theater organizations around the country, including Druid, the Abbey, Galway International Arts Festival. Will have you out on the ground and engaged in industry. And most importantly, you'll be doing theater and thinking about theater in ways that is important, that is trying to leave a mark in the world, as well as to understand the mark that theater has left in the world over generations. And we're great crack, so.
My goodness, Charlotte, you had me nearly signing up there myself to do another drama degree, even though I have one already. It sounds brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was hugely insightful and very, very interesting. And I wish you the best of luck with your work. And I hope that COVID, when COVID lifts, we'll see more about what your drama students are doing and what work they're making. And I wish them all the best of luck as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you again to Dr. Macgyver for joining us last year. It's great to look back and see how the conversations since April 2020 have shifted and what has stayed the same. You can check out this interview and more on our YouTube channel. We are now heading live to the rehearsal room with Will from Taste in Your Mouth to hear about their show, Narcissus, as part of the Dublin Fringe Festival.
Hi,
Fantastic.
Abigail.
Hello, Will. How are you keeping?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are things?
Good. Yeah, they're going well. Yeah, we're all good here at Taste in Your Mouth Incorporated HQ. Yeah, no one's fault yet, so it's a good rehearsal process.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your role in Taste in Your Mouth and the show.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So my name is Will, and I'm the writer and performer of Narcissus, which is the monologue play that we're going to be presenting as part of Dublin Fringe this year. So it's directed by Grace Morgan and Leisha Murray, who are the two other co-founders of Taste in Your Mouth, our theatre company. It's been stage managed by amazing Jennifer Oust and Julie Appleby, and then set costume video is Joy Payne Clark Owen, sound is Sam Hardiman, and lights are Matt McGowan, and our producer is Jack Farrell.
Fantastic. Sounds like a great team there.
It is.
So tell me about the show. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so it's a monologue play I wrote, maybe it's almost 3.5 years now at this stage. So I first presented it as a work in progress as part of Trinity Summer Festival. And then about 2 years ago now, it was in Galway Arts Festival as a Druid debut with Druid Theatre. And that was another kind of staged reading. And so this is finally the first full production of it. So it's about, it takes place over one line out, and it's about the relationship between three friends. Two of them, Mark and Matt, are together, are going out with each other, and the other is a little bit of an outsider. And yeah, it's about the adventure they get up to over the course of the night.
Very cool. And now, have you found there's quite a bit of change from your initial work at Galway Arts to now? And what has that change been?
So the structure of it is pretty much the same. You know, the arc of the night and where it starts and where it ends hasn't changed much. But you know, the lines themselves obviously change a bit along the way, and there's cuts and there's additions and stuff like that. But the basic shape of it has stayed the same. There hasn't been a huge change.
Fab. Well, so
Yeah.
you're collaborating with Archway Productions as well, right? So can you tell me about the relationship between Taste in Your Mouth and Archway?
Yeah, so Jack is Mr. Archway Productions. So it's a co-production with Archway and Taste in Your Mouth. So he's in charge of producing, and we kind of assist in that as well.
Fabulous. Awesome. So throughout our Keep the Conversations Going festival, we're asking people what they're thinking about, because often we're asked, what are we doing? What project are you working on? But I think it's really important to give that space. So with that said, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind?
In terms of Narcissus, in terms of the show, or just generally?
If there's something in Narcissus that's really sticking with you, or even just in general, is there anything that's like nagging you right now?
In general, what's on my mind? Yeah. In general, what's on my mind is I'm a little hungry right now. I'm going to take my lunch in a bit. But in terms of Narcissus, actually, it's funny. One thing that has been on my mind, because it's a couple of years now since I first wrote it, and you kind of expect everything you write to date a little bit after a while. And 3 years is, you know, there's been a significant change in the world in the last 3 years. And it's funny how things that you kind of never thought would date as quickly. For instance, there's a lot of reference to like cash during the play, and they run out of cash at various points, and they can't call a taxi because they don't have any cash. And it was one of those funny things that when I wrote it, it never occurred to me that that would be the thing that would go out of fashion so quickly. But it now seems so crazy that you would run out of cash when everyone pays by card or phone nowadays. So that was something that was on my mind. Yeah, or by watch, exactly. So that was all on my mind recently, and that was kind of a surprising discovery of the way that I had dated. Now, we couldn't change it because the plot hinges on that. So it's going to have to stay stuck in a pre-COVID era.
That's all right. I think we're all right
Yeah,
to see some pre-COVID work as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. And now, so you're performing. How has that been? Obviously, you said you guys are all collaborating together. Are you guys all in the room? Are you doing it over Zoom? What are you finding the collaborative process like right now?
Great, yeah. So we had our last day of rehearsals with just the kind of director and actors and stage managers yesterday. So we rehearsed a little bit earlier because one of the directors had another job in August. So we did most of our rehearsal process in July. So we just had a couple of extra days in August, and that was our last proper, regular rehearsal day. It's all kind of technical rehearsals after that in the week leading up to it. So yeah, no, it's been great. Having the two directors is great. It's like some of them take one day, and the other will take some days, and then sometimes they're both there together. And it's like being the child of divorce. You get shunted between your two moms, Grace and Leisha. Well, no, it's been a wonderful experience, and it's nice to have that balance. And Leisha is an actor as well. She's a much better actor than I am, so it's nice to have someone to talk you through kind of acting points, because I wouldn't be as comfortable a performer as she is.
Fabulous. Yeah, that sounds intense and interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh, we all want to be in the room together, and just to be collaborating is such a blessing. Would you tell people where it's showing for Dublin Fringe? Is it completely sold out? What's the status with that?
So it's going to be on in Smock Alley Boys School from the 13th to the 19th of September. I think we have a day off in the middle. I think it might be the Wednesday. But yes, it is all sold out at the
Congratulations.
moment, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, but also unfortunately, I wish I could come here and flog tickets, but I can't. Unless there's some sort of radical change in restrictions between now and the 13th, I think it's going to remain sold out. But hopefully, maybe it'll have a future life and everyone will get to see it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I am delighted just to chat with you. I know you joined us a while back to talk about the Liaison Dangereuse, the musical you were doing, which was fantastic. So delighted to hear about another production.
Well, thank you for having me back on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, great. Thanks very much, Aria.
Thanks. The TheatreMaker team has been fundraising all of the month of August, and we'd like to thank the following people for their donations to our Keep the Conversations Going campaign. Thank you to Joseph Clough, who donated 40 euros from San Marcos. Thank you so much to Catherine in Dublin, who donated 20 euros to the campaign. Thank you so much to the Isaacs Network from Wexford for donating 100 euros. And to Vengeance, the Oscar Wilde musical in Bognor Regis for donating 50 euros. Thank you so much for all of your support to help keep the conversations going. All right, we'll be back in a few minutes with an interview with the stalwart of the Irish theatre scene, John O'Lahan, who was recently in Druid's production of The Seagull, as well as our interview with Pamela McQueen from the TheatreMaker archives. Stay tuned.
Hello all and welcome to this special report for Stage Door Live, and I am delighted to be joined by Pamela McQueen from the New Theatre. Pamela, how are you keeping?
Good, yeah. Busy enough, but good.
I can see there from your lovely artwork in the back that you've been busy at home with the kids.
Yes, absolutely. So the homeschool juggle with a little bit of continuing to work on developing scripts with writers and some mentorship projects and a sort of little bit of juggling of reimagining what projects could be in our new COVID reality, you know?
Yes, that's fantastic. And Pamela, as you mentioned there, in addition to your freelance work, you are a dramaturg at the New Theatre, a theatre whose mission it is to support the development of emerging and established writers, which it has been doing now for over 2 decades. Pamela, could you tell us a little bit about what makes the New Theatre unique in the theatre sector in Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose unique is sort of a kind of consideration of where we exist in the kind of ecology of Irish theatre, if you see what I mean. So we'd be aware of working with playwrights and trying to kind of, particularly emerging playwrights, trying to help them, support them as they enter their career paths through their first productions, their early productions. And I suppose one of the things that we think a lot about in terms of less our uniqueness, but more our place in the ecology of Irish theatre. So we like to work with as many people as possible. So, for example, with the Seen and Heard Festival, which is a wonderful development of new work festival that's run by Cueva Conley and Cliona Dukes down in Seen and Heard, we would regularly kind of keep contact with them, and then we would support new writers coming out of that festival to develop their short piece, which is usually about 10-15 minutes, into a full-length play of an hour or more, to have what is often their first full professional stage production. So, for example, last year we did a production called Gone by Annie Keegan, which came through that route to us. So from a 15-minute piece, I would have worked with Annie and developed an expanded draft, then done notes and a table read with actors, and then I went through a further drafting process, and it became a very, very funny play that ran with us very successfully to good audiences, about the alternative imagining of the life of Maud Gonne. And then for Annie, that meant that it was great because, yeah, really interesting topic. She had a platform then for her first production where she could invite theatre industry professionals. So I know that one of my colleagues, Rebecca Mayers from the Lyric in Belfast, came to see that show. And subsequently Annie applied for and became part of the new playwrights programme in Belfast at the Lyric, and is now currently on the working with Druid as a developing artist as well down in Galway. So yeah, the New Theatre looks at itself, as a unique producing house, but also a way for writers to connect with the wider ecology of Irish theatre. And we've, platforms of both production and development. So we co-produce with people where we support them to get their plays to the stage. And as well as those emerging writers I spoke about, we also work with writers who would be maybe coming back to the theatre after a period of time. And that was something that we became particularly conscious about, both myself and Anthony Fox, who's the artistic director, in a kind of post-Waking the Feminists environment, where it became clear that some women writers in particular weren't sort of allowed or enabled, shall we say, to continue their careers. So last year we were delighted to have a couple of people back with us after a number of years away from theatre, writing for theatre. Elizabeth Moynihan did a wonderful play for us, Quicksand, and that was co-produced with us. And we also then co-produced another new play from a writer called Tara Maria Lovett. So that is important to us, to support talent that's also coming back as well as emerging in its early days. And
it sounds to me, Pamela, that you guys are providing a platform that people would otherwise, find very hard to get their work out there. Because we had Angus Og McAnally speaking to us on Stage Door Live a while ago, and he spoke about how the New Theatre and Smock Alley were like starter venues where, a theatre maker wouldn't have to have the guts of €5,000 in their back pocket to get their work seen. If you guys obviously didn't provide that platform, we would be denied, seeing, or I suppose losing a chance to connect with a diverse group of voices. So do you feel there's a need for more venues like the New Theatre and Smock Alley around the Republic and in Dublin?
I mean, yes, definitely. There is a need for support of our emerging artists and new work coming through. There's, putting together a play, any play, but particularly a new play where you're also developing the script simultaneously, is a complex engagement with, a lot of a wide collaborative team. And so those venues need to be there, but they also need to be financially supported to actually enable the production of that work, So one of the things that the New Theatre does is it's incredibly economical, So you can, as you said, I think it was yourself or Angus who mentioned having 5,000 in your back pocket, which is a big ask for anybody. But you come to the New Theatre and we can give you the benefit of the resource of the building. So that might be some free rehearsal space. It's then coming in with the technical support. It's the fact that our box office is there with the Take Your Seats company. And then there's a marketing support there to promote your show, both, you know, within the industry for reviewers and to the wider public and the new theatre audience. So that scaffolding has to be available.
Yeah.
All those elements to bring a show together and to get them to the stage. And as you go on in your career in theatre, you will develop relationships with people, artistic and technical and all sorts, that will enable you, if you need to self-produce, to bring those things together. But very often in the beginning and in the early days, it's hard to navigate that process, you know. So we're there to help with those supports in the immediate sense, and then to give that introduction to professional practice and what's required to making a show at that level, you know. So yes, there is a need for more venues, but also for those venues to have a decent amount of funding to provide that kind of full package for emerging artists and playwrights in general.
And also to provide encouragement and nurturing. I've always found the New Theatre to be a very nurturing, safe space when I've gone in to see shows, where people can express, you know, other views and, you know, have a bit of fun and take risk. And you guys seem to provide that space, which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking risk, as you say, is important, because when you are a writer finding your voice, you know, 1, 2, 3 plays in, whatever it is, you have to take risks to discover the type and the aesthetic of the theatre that you want to make, that will be your voice, you know. So there's no point in you making something that you think might sell, because that's not going to be a way for you to find your original voice, you know. So you know, we talk about honoring the intentions of the playwright all the time in the theatre, you know, and supporting that vision and coming through. So yeah, it is essential, and it's a unique space. It's small and it's intimate, and it's, people often say that they find it very accessible to walk in, to look for a meeting with somebody, even attending theatre for maybe some people's first time, you know.
Yeah, and you know you're going to be seeing something fresh and a new idea, which is always lovely as well, you know. And I'm sure you guys get a lot of scripts, and it must be a lot of fun to go through them and sift through them.
Yeah, I mean, one key piece that we do every year is called the New Play Reading Week. So what we do is we do an open call, and we advertise it widely and invite anybody to submit a script to the theatre. And there's very few caveats on it, other than sort of, you know, not having a cast of 25 maybe, you know. And so anybody can submit, and we usually get sort of in the region of a sort of 100 to 120 submissions every year that a whole panel of readers will go through, and those will be anonymous, you know, the scripts will be anonymous. And from those we draw anywhere from 4 to 8 plays and scenes to bring on further, in terms of, I will work with the writers, do some notes on the text, they'll revise it, and then we'll have actors, professional actors and directors come in and work with the playwright, and after a day or day and a half's work, present it in a reading to an audience, and then have feedback from the audience. So it's a way for writers to develop.
I was going to say, it must be a marvelous opportunity for a writer to see something that they've written come alive on the stage, maybe for the first time.
Yes, and like, there's a few different aspects to it. I mean, sometimes it gets a play to the point where it can be produced. So that's a wonderful thing. That's a kind of piece of development work for the writer. In other cases, we discover people, in a sense, or we spot some particular ability or talent. The play itself might not be ready, so we've created this thing where you can have a scene read instead, and for those people, it's generally the very first time they've had anything ever read out, even by actors, you know, and it is an extraordinary learning curve for them. So last year we had a playwright, a woman called Ella Skolomonski, come into us, and she had a scene read out. Then she went on to be in Heard, and then she came back to us for the Fight Back Festival and did a 10-minute piece. So that's an example of a really good trajectory for a beginning writer and their voice emerging and developing over a couple of opportunities to hopefully then get a full length play and hopefully submit it to us again, you know?
Yes, of course. I'm sure her confidence was probably building throughout that process and being able to, have that opportunity in the first place. So it's a wonderful platform. So Pamela, obviously we're living in very strange, unprecedented times at the moment. How have you been working with artists to reconfigure or adapt existing projects that were due to go on in the theatre?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on some of the medium to long-term projects in the theatre and then in my kind of freelance capacity as well. And I mean, the very first thing in some sense was there was an element of shock, wasn't there? And, to sort of hold your nerve almost was the first thing, to keep writing, to keep looking at deadlines, to keep moving towards those deadlines, because we didn't really know what we were dealing with. And now I think we're beginning to understand a little bit more about the time frame. So it's kind of a choice between continuing on the path you're on, or with that particular piece of work, or looking at perhaps writing in response to the events, and then also looking at what medium we're writing for. So some of the digital stuff is wonderful, and it's great to see some rapid response writing, but maybe we need to start thinking about how you write for those digital platforms specifically. And then also, of course, to continue in the traditional mode of stage writing, because there will be a point when we return from this, at whatever stage that is,
Yes,
and we will need those plays ready too.
Yes, people will be eager to get back into the theatre. I'm sure they're all sick of their Netflix box sets and they want to get out and see live performance, So you guys will be ready for that when we eventually get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the new theatre, there's a whole slate of work that hasn't been able to go on stage since March, So there's a couple of plays like literally ready to go. Where normally we'd be 63. So that's difficult to negotiate in terms of, balancing that box office income against the expense of the production, So I think what all theatres may face as we go forward is maybe how much we are able to produce, in terms of the amount,
That's an interesting point that you're making there, Pamela, because obviously spaces are under threat now for, of financial ruin, as it were. Is there a way that the public can support the new theatre now during this time and other spaces like it?
I mean, in the most immediate sense, you can become a friend of the new theatre. So there's a friendship scheme which starts from something quite low. I think it's 25 or 30 euro, and then it goes up in increments, So that's on the website. It's also on our Facebook page. So you can do that straight away as an immediate action, if you know what I mean. I think there's also maybe just thinking about the future as it emerges, kind of being brave enough to support theatres by going back to them, and then also maybe thinking about in the wider picture that I think ultimately it'll be very necessary to have some special one-off government support for venues as well as for individual artists. And so that is going to be a campaign, as indeed the National Campaign for the Arts is already in action on this topic, and that members of the public can actually, express their urgency about this issue to their own TDs and to their own councillors, whether that's on social media or by emailing them or whatever. And it's important for the politicians to understand that it's not only artists who are concerned about this, but also the public. The public and the audience members don't want to lose those venues.
Yeah, that's a very good point because, obviously we always think in terms of how can we support financially, but there are other ways. There's ways of supporting within the community. Get in touch with the local TD, as you say, and push, and try and get support for our venues it's just hugely important for the arts, and the arts need to continue to thrive, and especially venues like the New Theatre, where artists can grow and develop and have a safe space to do so.
Absolutely, yeah. And they are vulnerable at the moment. We've seen recently Beauty's Cafe Theatre obviously is under threat once that building has now shuttered, apparently. So there, for example, is one venue that for a new home straight away before we've gone very deep into this crisis at all. And certainly in terms of Dublin, that's the only lunchtime venue. So that whole kind of audience is gone in a sense, or there's no service for that audience if Beauty's isn't there. And it's also equally important for many practitioners around the country who would come up to Beauty's with their shows. It's a way to reach Dublin, reach national newspapers for reviewers. I mean, we have the same thing at the New Theatre. We'd sometimes bring in new plays from other counties who would deem it very important as writers for their careers to be able to access national press reviewing by coming to Dublin, And of course, from our point of view, it allows us to see work from around the country, because touring is another thing that does regularly as a way of bringing Dublin writers out and around the country, and also generating box office income for the playwrights,
Yes. So Pamela, the New Theatre recently had the Fight Back project. Can you tell us just a little bit about that and the response that it had?
Yeah, I think it was a great idea. It was Anthony's idea who came up with that, and he was working with Take Your Seats. And actually, the dramaturg who worked on that was Jessica Traynor, and it was a very much a rapid response to the moment, And I think in that sense, it was quite powerful and evocative, because it came right at the beginning when we didn't really know what we were dealing with, and the writers very much spoke to those kind of senses of upheaval and confusion, and the characters, a lot of the characters were very kind of dislocated in their own lives, and it seemed to really, really chime with people. And there was a very big sort of turnout online every night, and a lovely bit of chat as well. And so I think also in that moment of isolation, it connected people as well, and certainly connected a lot of the artists and kind of community and audience around the New Theatre, which was great. And yeah, it's the split, if you like. There was some donations that came in through it, and 70% went to the artists. So again, as almost all work was cancelled in a very kind of immediate term, as venues closed down, all the live contracts were cancelled. It generated a little bit of income to just kind of keep the wolf at the door, which was also a very kind of pragmatic and result of that, which was great too, So I think people are kind of maybe started looking about more kind of long-term artistic reactions now to it, and so there's a lot of discussion about what type of theatre we can make now in terms of moving forward, and how certain things are suitable for digital platforms. So for example, myself and Anthony were talking about definitely going ahead with the new play reading week this year, but perhaps looking at the format of it later in the year, so that it might be a very small audience in the theatre, but something that we could open out then by streaming online. And instead of having a live post-show talk, the post-show talk in essence happens in the chat bar at the bottom, so the questions are coming in that way, So just ways you can merge the live and the digital and get the best benefit of both of them. So I think many, many people in theatre are doing this, looking at having to take each individual project and sort of analyze it for the best way forward that serves the theatrical and performance intention of the project, So some things maybe will migrate quite well, and other things, it might be simply a question of kind of saying that'll have to wait till 2021,
So it will be a case of trial and error, won't it? Really, for everybody to find their feet and how
to
they're
some
going.
degree.
Yeah, which is understandable in these times. But thank you so much for talking to us today, Pamela. It's been really lovely, interesting chat, and I wish you all the best now with your upcoming projects and keeping the faith and keeping theatre alive and going. It's very important work that you're doing. And is it still? Can we still support those pieces that are on takeyourseats.ie, or is it still an
Absolutely,
option to
yeah,
donate?
it's still possible to view them. Yeah, they're all there, and yeah, as I say, either through that platform or by becoming a friend of the New Theatre, which we equally like. We love to have friends.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. He learned his craft working with the greats and quickly became one of them. In addition to his illustrious career spanning film, TV, theatre, and most recently our computers with Fishamble's Tiny Plays premiere this weekend, John is also an Irish Theatre Award winner. John, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. How are you keeping?
I'm very well, Kelly. I'm great.
Brilliant.
That was some introduction.
I know, and not even, I honestly don't think it's long enough for you to be fitting for a legend as yourself. But yeah, I want to just gonna get stuck into the questions now, John. So as I understand, you started off on stage from an early age, but not as an actor. You played in a band. Can you tell us a bit about your journey from there? What made you fall in love with it?
Well, you see, I grew up in the 60s. And of course, like everybody else, we discovered the Beatles in Kells, County Meath. And sure, of course, we had to form a band because everybody was forming bands at that stage, even though none of us could play an instrument. So we started to take lessons here, there, and everywhere. I went down to the nuns in the convent, asked them, would they teach me to play the piano? And then I progressed to a few chords on a guitar. And then before you know it, we were playing locally in the local hall and sort of in Navan and in the local golf club. And it was good crack. And then, of course, things progressed and, people came, band members came, and then we formed another band. And then it broke up after a while because there were no venues for us to play in, would you believe, even in Dublin. I mean,
what?
Other than pubs. And we were kind of a folk ensemble. And we sang acoustic, with acoustic guitars. And we just, there were no venues. Like for instance, the bands at the time, like Sweeney's Men and the Johnsons, were playing in bars, and the stuff that we were doing, it just didn't suit that kind of, an atmosphere. And we were on one night with Danny Doyle, I remember, in Liberty Hall, and I was the whole audience was drunk. And we came on all serious and singing our really deep songs. And there were 4 girls in the band and myself and my cousin. And they were all full of meaning and full of, philosophy. And they did not want to hear us. They just told us to F off. So we literally had to leave the stage before finishing the set. They just wanted Danny Doyle. They just wanted, sing-along stuff. So after that, we broke up. And I said, what am I going to do now? So I decided I'd go into the Abbey School of Acting to learn stage techniques so that the next time we went on stage, we wouldn't have to walk off. So acting was kind of like secondary. So I went into the Abbey School to learn production techniques, but unfortunately, that wasn't a subject that was being taught in the Abbey School of Acting.
Oh.
The Abbey
So you
School
went
of
for
Acting
the
at the time
acting
was like
instead then?
2 hours on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and that was it. And if you were working, you know, that's how you paid your rent. There was no, I think there was a slight fee, you know, at the time. I'm not quite sure. But then you got work then in the Abbey with as an extra, and you got something like £2.50 a week, £2.50 a week to do the extra work.
Wow.
And but you see, it was all relative because, you know, the rent was about £4. You know, so it was back in those days. Surely that's how long ago.
Yeah, I'd love if that was the case now, John.
I know. I wish it was myself. But anyway, that suddenly I was, you know, I went for an audition for the Abbey School, and the next thing I found myself in a play, and in the Peacock. So that was the beginning.
Was that a professional? Was that a professional production?
Yeah, yeah. It was an Abbey
You
production.
walked into a professional,
and he says, "Join the cast." and it wasn't just a walk on. I had actual lines in the play.
Wow. What was that like?
Scary as hell. You know, I mean, I didn't know. But it turned out to be the maddest production of a play I have ever seen. Well, I thought it was crazy then, not knowing anything to judge it by. But it turned out to be the maddest production. It was a production of Let the Ravens Feed was the name of the play. It was about the Brian Boru and the Battle of Clontarf, and the lead up to the Battle of Clontarf, and there were like there were 64 characters in the play. So with the result that
you had
the entire Abbey
baptism
School
of fire then.
Yeah. But it was hilarious. I had a great time doing it.
Is that when you fell in love with acting?
Yeah, well, it was all good fun. You know what I mean? It was all. I mean,
you just enjoyed the crack.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So obviously you're talking about, you know, you joined the Abbey School of Acting. How important was your experience working with the leading actors of Irish theatre at that time?
Well, now that's where you learned how to do it. It wasn't in the school. The school was. You went to. It was mainly a club, like for young fellas and young ones. And you went up there and you chatted and talked about, you know, the latest release and record release, or, you know, the latest film you saw or whatever. You know, there was very little work done. And then you listened to Frank Dermody, who was a brilliant man in his own right, but not the best teacher in the world. But he'd rant on about, you know, how he thought actors should behave. And you just listen to him going on and on and on and on and on and on and on forever. And then you just, you know, you went down and you did extra work. And then you watched how the actors did it, you know. And at the time, I remember Frank Dermody saying things like, I mean, he had kind of pearls of wisdom the odd time. He used to say, whenever you pass an Abbey actor in the corridor, lower your eyes, because every night they're in touch with the divine. You see? So for years, I never looked an Abbey actor in the eye. I used to say, hello, Mr. Cave. Hello, Bernadette. Hello. And I'd keep my eyes lowered the whole time, every time I passed them, for years. And I told this some of them are my best friends now, you know. So I told them this, and they said, "You fucking idiot! What are you doing?" I says, "I
Oh,
walked by you for 2 years without even looking at your face, because Frank Dermody told me that you're in touch with the divine every night, so we shouldn't look in your face."
that is
So that was the kind
hilarious.
of, yeah, but it did teach you a certain amount of respect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You felt that these people were, you were serving your time, you know, and these were the master craftsmen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, watching them do their thing on stage must have
Yeah.
been amazing at
And
the
that's where you
time. Yeah.
learned. You watched them and you kept your eye on them, and you saw when they moved, and you saw, you know, and you just picked it up as you were watching. And I was there for about 3 years, I think, in the Abbey School of Acting.
Wow. And so obviously, you know, that was 1969, and you've had an unbelievable career, you know, spanning like, you know, decades, and just successful career. It's good, John. It's good. You've been, you know, constantly working in all different areas of theatre. I'm sure there weren't that many times, but when you weren't working in theatre, did you have any other jobs that you found yourself doing in between gigs?
No.
No. Oh my gosh. You are like you are a rare phenomenon.
No, I never did anything else.
That's
I know, it's kind of
amazing.
mad. Yeah. But it was a much smaller family at the time, and it was a family because everybody knew everybody else. I mean, there wasn't an actor, you know, that you didn't know. I mean, it was like living in a small town, and
Yeah.
there was still, you know, everybody was still giving out about no work and blah blah blah, and everybody was complaining about, but not the younger people. There were, you know, we were all like in little groups. Like for instance, I went in from the Abbey School. I went into the Young Abbey, which was like 6 actors, and we did everything. You know, we did the sets, made the props, we drove the van, you know, and we went around all the schools. It was a bit like, you know, Team, which was a follow on from the Young Abbey, and that lasted for a while. I was touring. We toured all over the country, and then we
Wow.
were paid the lowest Abbey rate, which was about 24 pounds at the time. But we were also paid a touring allowance, which brought it up. So we were, at the time, we were very well looked after, very well paid.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
with 24 pounds
relatively speaking.
context,
I mean,
was that a lot of money, 24 pounds at that time?
no,
Would that
it
have
wasn't a
been?
lot of money. I mean, the average, I remember it would have been, the average industrial wage would have been about 50 quid, or about 40 or 50 quid at the time. But it was all right. I mean, my rent, I had a flat in North Great Georgia Street in a beautiful room. You know what I mean? Now, again, it was a bed sit. You know, it was rough and ready. You shared a bathroom. Well, not a bathroom. You shared a Jack's and a what?
We've all had those,
kind of
John.
shower.
We've all had those.
And it was, but the room itself was beautiful. It was the music room. It was on the first floor, and I paid 8 quid a week. You know, so
Yeah. Wow.
it was nothing really. You know,
Yeah.
but it was 8 quid out of 25. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, I suppose as artists, you know, theatre like makers and actors, we go into the arts because we love it. And so, you know, sometimes we accept less than we deserve in terms of payment, and sometimes on occasion like treatment. How has that changed? How has your attitude changed throughout your career towards, you know, payment and treatment? Can you talk to us about that, like from obviously how your experience grew on that?
Well, I was very lucky. I mean, I never had much gripe about money. Now, I remember making allowances for, you know, if you worked for a freelance company, you know, that hadn't much money, well, you took what you got. and you just were delighted you got the work, and you said, well, yeah, great. But if you worked, say, for the National Theatre or the Abbey or the Gate, or they were on there was a fixed rate, and Equity were fairly strong at the time, and there was the rules and regulations about payment were very strict, and there were, Equity had a lot of power, and the actors had a lot of power, because there was a players' council in the Abbey, and they had an input, and whatever deal they made with the management for their payment, that was reciprocated outside, in the outer world, in the freelance world. So there was the actors were able to control their standard of pay.
Yeah.
So it was all right, but that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. I feel like I feel like sometimes actors. Yeah, it is, and actors, because I suppose it is the family you called it, gotten ginormous. It's a big family now in Ireland of actors.
Yeah,
big it is a big family, so it's slightly more competitive, and obviously you get theatre makers and artists taking less then, because it's as you said, it's the work, and they're happy to do the work, but sometimes they're living on nothing,
and big rents.
Yeah. John, it could be easy to say, wow, it was all like plain sailing, smooth sailing, and it was all highs and all positives. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some disappointments you might have had, or near misses on parts, or anything like that?
Well, the biggest setback I had was I was in the Abbey School of Acting, and this was the first time something happened, and nothing as serious has happened since, and I hope it never happens again. But there was somebody went sick in the show, and it was a full-on Abbey play. It was the Seagull, Chekhov's.
Oh,
Seagull.
Chekhov.
And someone got sick, and I was asked would I go into it, and I was only up from Kells, like, I didn't know, and I said no, and they said, well, you'll damage your career if you don't do this, because I was the last in the they were scraping the bottom of the barrel, but I didn't know that at the time, because everybody else had said they wouldn't do it, but I didn't know that. So I went on with the book and tried to read it, but I was so scared that it just didn't work, and so I looked about 12.
That was a bit unfair. Did you have any rehearsal, John?
No, straight on. Oh. Now I was playing an extra in the play, but I didn't know how to do it. But then after 3 nights, I was replaced by somebody that could do it. But they'd been rehearsing during the day while I was, making an idiot of myself at night. And I said, I'm going home now, and I'm not coming back. I'm not doing this anymore. I was really, really knocked for 6. And I didn't know. No, but really, I mean, seriously, I said, this is it. I can't do this. I'm not able. And so Tomás McCanna, who was a director, he was artistic director of the Peacock at the time, and he saw me, and he understood exactly what happened, and he put his arms around me, and he says, I have a big part for you down in the Peacock. Come down, don't get too worried, forget about all that rubbish, come down to me. And he put his arms around me, and he brought me down, and he gave me a small part in a play called The Plebeians Rehearse the Uprising. And he saved me bacon, really.
And he got you back
from
into
myself.
it. Yeah. But I mean, John, that sounds like every actor's worst nightmare. It's like that dream that actors have, where they're shoved on the stage and they don't know the lines and they don't know the book. Yeah, exactly. And you lived through that. Do you find that you're a better actor as a result of it?
No, I'm terrified every time.
Fair enough.
No, really.
We'll chalk it down to experience.
The thing about it is, if you go on stage and the whole job is to look as if it's the easiest thing in the world. You know, that's the hardest part, to make it look like as if, sure, Jesus, this is great crack. You know, that's the hard part. I mean, but literally your insides are going, Janie, get over here. You know what I mean? And I thought this was, until recently, I thought it was only me who was feeling this. And it's only listening to people talking on shows like this and on television and different interviews with people, that anxiety is huge in the business. Like, huge. And, you know, I got some relief in the last 12 months listening to people talking about, you know, I mean, actors like Judi Dench and, you know, big actors, you know, who go on stage and massive roles, and they feel exactly the same. I mean, I was relieved to hear that. Yeah,
that you're not alone in it. Like, because obviously this is what this is actually what this episode is about. This week is about, you know, mental health and well-being and how we cope with those anxieties. Do you have any tricks of the trade, John? How do you I suppose mind yourself?
I got married. And I had 2 children, and suddenly all that kind of takes second fiddle. You play second fiddle on with all that anxiety and everything. You know, when you have responsibilities like that, and then a mortgage, and then you know, electricity bills and all sorts of things, and you know, you stop thinking about yourself. You know, you start thinking about other people, and with the result that, and it helped too that Catherine, who's my wife, it helped that she was an actress, so it worked out. I mean, looking back, like, if I wasn't working, she was working, or if I was working, she wasn't working, so that there was always somebody there to mind the kids. Now, we had a load of babysitters that kind of like on call, you know, to just run in and just take over whenever was needed. And they were fantastic. Without them, we couldn't have done it. But there was a kind of a sharing. Like, once there was one wage coming in all the time, it just eased everything. Do you know what I mean? It made everything much easier.
Yeah. So Catherine, would you say, was your biggest support then in your career? Yeah. And vice versa.
Yeah. I know. I wouldn't have been able to do it. It would have been mad to try and do it like on my own and try, you know, and cope with all the lunacy that goes on in the business.
Absolutely. I know what you're saying.
You know, you can just like retreat home to a whole new set of problems. Do you know what I mean? And it puts everything in perspective.
Absolutely. You spoke there of Catherine and your sons, and actually you last night only in Fishamble's Tiny Plays with Catherine and Jack. How was it to work with them in that context?
Great, yeah. Well, I've worked with Catherine several times, you know, over the years, and but yeah, it was great. It was great fun to have Jack in it as well. You know, it was great crack.
He's just come back. Do you give each other notes?
Huh? Yes, of course.
Oh,
even when we're not working together, I get notes and I give notes all the time.
Great, and I suppose you're kind of used to that now, and it's well, you know, received.
Yeah. Well, it's asked for. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I
Yeah.
don't give them, unwillingly. Like they ask me what I think. if I
I
gave
suppose
it
you've learned that
unwillingly,
the hard way.
oh yes.
Oh, brilliant. So, yeah, can you tell us a little bit, John, about when you won the Irish Theatre Award in 2011 for your role as Byrne Maggie? Well, actually, talk first about being nominated and then tell us a little bit about the win.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love John B. Keane. Like I had done John B. Keane's back in the Abbey back in the when was it? Back in the 80s. Catherine and myself we did The Field together. We did Sive. We did Big Maggie. We did Sharon's Grave. Like we did a load of Keane plays when there was a kind of a big revival of Keane back then, back in the 80s. And then Druid then in what year was it? 2000, it was the early 2000s, I think. And they asked me to do Big Maggie, a different part. They asked me to play Byrne. And I was delighted, it was great crack. And then to be nominated was like a big surprise. And
How did you hear about the nomination?
Oh, I can't remember, Kelly. I can't remember. I think it was just, I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, to hear my name called out going into the auditor, I got a terrible fright. And I just went up and I can't remember what I said, but
was it just a blur?
Yeah. But,
God, it must have been such a moment of pride for you, John, because I suppose all actors have that hope to win something or to be recognised. Was it nice?
Well, it's not winning. The winning is something. It was more just to be recognised by people that you're working. You're working away.
Yeah, your peers. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit now about how the sector has grown and changed so much since trained. How do you feel that change has impacted on newly trained actors and theatre makers?
Well, it's all got a bit serious now. I remember, back when it wasn't too serious, people say, oh, the productions must have been terrible. They must have been, but some of the best productions I have ever seen were back then. You had, things like Des Cave's, the Oedipus Rex, and, the Sanctuary Lamp. Tom Murphy's Sanctuary Lamp and the first production of it, and the first production of Morning After Optimism, and there was a production of The Well of the Saints with Eamon Kelly and Morny Gomel, which stunning, like fantastic, they're not done. The big productions like that are not done anymore. Do you know what I mean? Or they're very few and far between.
Yeah,
but there was people were less. It's not that they were less serious about the work. There was more. There seemed to be more fun in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's all very serious and competitive, and there's a lot of people going around with folders and managements and people talking about grants, and oh man, it's just
it's a minefield now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, and it's too serious. I find it's too serious for what you have to do, because unless you have you have to be sort of light-hearted to do what we do.
You say now to yourself, lucky that you found acting when you found it, you know, in your day as opposed to now. How would you navigate it now?
I don't know. I think I wouldn't. I think, you see, I don't think it would happen the same way as it happened for me back then. You see, it kind of all fell into place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't planned. There was no kind of, there wasn't, you see, at the time, there were no agents. There were no kind of, like for instance, the top corridor of the Abbey, there were about half a dozen people running the Abbey, like the office.
Yeah.
You know, there was the girl who handed out the wages. There were 2 people in box office, 2 people in the manager's office, and you know, a couple of other, you know, PR people. You know, but that was it. Like,
and now it's a huge operation, the Abbey.
200 or 300 people. You know what I mean? All running around with folders. You know, human resource people.
John, that's a great image. That's such a good image.
People in offices the size of a cupboard. You know, it's just crazy stuff.
Yeah, what you're saying, for sure.
I mean,
and obviously now we're in a very strange time now for acting as well, particularly at the moment, you know, because a lot of things have stalled. But obviously you have managed to keep busy. I saw you there on the screen. You've been in an advert for 3, the network. Can you talk about how you even film that during lockdown?
Well, it was done at the very beginning of the lockdown, and we were all a bit scared. And because I am the age I am, I mean, you know, Catherine says, you're not going anywhere. You're staying locked.
Yeah.
Because it was so dangerous. So this ad came in, and I said, how am I going to do this? And they said, well, we'll do it. You can do it from your house, from your living room. And I said, I've never heard of this done before. And they said, well, we haven't done it before either. It's all new. So 2 fellas came along in a van, like a high-ace van, and they unloaded a couple of lights and a tripod, and they put it in the window of the house, and Catherine took it in, the fellas were shouting and saying, put it there, put it there. Put it up, erected the thing. I knew the few lines that I had. They stuck 2 iPhones together, and Catherine was looking at one, and I was looking at the other. And the director was on one of the iPhones, and he was in the south of France. He was cocooning with his father in the south of France, and that's how he made how he was.
What? So he was directing you from the south of France in your.
Yeah, he was directing the guys in our front garden as well. And of course, they put up a screen out to block the light from the front window. And of course, everybody thought that, you know, when they saw all the activity and the wires and everything, that I had been, you know, infected of this to some degree.
You were causing a stir.
So what the hell is going on there? Do you know what I mean? Because there was a screen around the window, and there was like wires and all sorts of yokes going out through the front garden.
That's amazing. So did Catherine shoot that then? Did Catherine shot that?
Yeah, she did all the sort of technical work. And
fair play. That's amazing.
You know, well, you know, it was like switching on and moving the camera, moving the lights around, and all that part of it.
Yeah. And wow. So it just shows you don't have to be in the same room anymore to make something.
See, it's just crazy. And I was amazed at the quality. The quality was...
Yeah.
I mean,
phenomenal. You would never have known that was shot on an iPhone.
No.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
Oh, and so, yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about your the filming of the Fishamble piece that you did with Jack and Catherine? How was that?
Well, we had a couple of rehearsals like this. And no, we had one rehearsal, I think, like this. And then we went into Fishamble, built their rooms, where they operate from.
Yeah.
And we had a rehearsal there. And we came in 2 days later and shot it.
Gosh, amazing.
It was that.
And success. Such a nice thing to do. And hopefully we'll be seeing more of that now in the coming months. Yeah. It's still nice to create work. So on that note, John, like what advice would you have for any upcoming actors, and obviously that might be experiencing a bit of anxiety themselves as to what's going on at the moment?
Well, keep your fingers crossed, number one. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I mean, things happen in this business. You can't plan it. You never could. Things like float in the window, like literally in the last job. But they literally happen. And, you're saying, I wonder will the phone ring today? And the phone rings. I don't know how that happens. It just does. Now, I don't know whether it just happens for me, but that's the way.
I think it's safe to say that doesn't happen for everyone.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. I don't know. I mean, I've never actually sat down and planned a strategy, of how I should, conduct my career or, conduct this business of acting. I've never, it's not something you can
plan.
Just go home and make the dinner and, do a bit of gardening. And when nothing is around, I go up and I do a bit of drawing or a bit of watercolor painting or something like that, and that's what I do.
That's lovely, John. So I didn't know you did watercolor.
Yeah, I do a bit of that.
How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing it since I was at school. I mean, I have no formal training or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just something that you do to unwind and relax a bit.
Yeah. When I get that takes energy and time, and I mean the whole thing of, I'm the biggest procrastinator in the world. I won't. I mean, I'd find any excuse not to go up and do a drawing or do something. It just takes effort and energy to do it. But when I do find the time, or not the time, when I find the inclination, I'll go up and I'll, do a few things.
Yeah. You mentioned gardening there as well. Are you a bit of a gardener yourself?
I'll do an odd bit of, nothing serious.
Yeah, but I mean, I only recently discovered gardening during COVID because it was one of those things where I was like, oh, well, what else am I going to do? I might as well spruce up my little garden. And I actually found it very therapeutic.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I get up on the bike the odd night and I'll go off for a bit of a cycle around, around the neighborhood, and, it's great.
Yeah. Bit of cycling, bit of gardening, bit of watercoloring. God, you've loads there. Loads of nice things that you.
I have a membership in the gym, and you wouldn't think it, but I miss that because I love swimming. I'd swim, 30 lengths every 4 times a week. But wow. I love that, so I miss that a lot.
Be able to get back into swimming and all those things very soon, because I'd be the same now. I miss the gym. Yeah. But John, it was absolutely A pleasure to speak to you. You're great crack. I mean, your career has been amazing, and it's been so good to chat to you about, obviously, how you've unwinded during, your time as an actor, and also how Catherine and your family have been such a support. That's been lovely to hear as well. And thank you so much for joining us here on Stage Door Live.
My pleasure, Kelly. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's great to hear Pamela McQueen and John Oland's conversation with Kelly O'Doherty from the TheatreMaker.ie archives. At TheatreMaker, just to give you an idea of some of the work we've done, we have put in the hours. Here is TheatreMaker's impact in the numbers. We've created 96 hours, 16 minutes and 10 seconds of content. In Irish theatre this week, we've made 14 episodes. Altogether, that's 5 hours, 38 minutes and 11 seconds. The average Irish theatre this week show clocks in at 26 minutes. And all of you have viewed ITTW 40,208 times. Wow. For Stage Door Live, we've made 31 episodes. That's 51 hours, 35 minutes and 9 seconds. The average SDL episode clocks in at 1 hour, 39 minutes and 51 seconds. And SDL has been viewed 64,799 times. All our video content has 88,788 views on Facebook, 20,994 views on YouTube, and 9,878 views on Twitter. We've featured 157 artists, art workers, producers, directors and other creatives here at TheatreMaker. And we here at TheatreMaker have helped other organisations create just over 36 hours of content. This live stream is finishing, and a new live stream will be starting at 3 o'clock, where we will be live with Maureen Folan, Artistic Director of the Off the Ropes Theatre Company, and Mary Moynihan, Artistic Director of Smashing Times. Then we'll finish up the afternoon schedule, there will be more on the way afterwards, with Joseph Clock's presentation on conquering imposter syndrome. Joseph is a master hypnotist and life coach, calling very early in the morning from California. You won't want to miss that. Of course, the Keep the Conversations Going campaign festival is our chance to raise the funds we need to continue. TheatreMaker.ie support of the Irish theatre sector is important. Please do consider making a donation on our website at TheatreMaker.ie. Thank you for joining us for this morning session. We'll see you again at 3 o'clock.